Attempt, dua, attempt.
Puja, greetings. So we'll pick up where we left off the last time when we're discussing the issue of the names of the divinities and how they're derived and how they are, how the sages came about the names of the divinity through meditative exploration and mystic communication with the cosmic intellect, the cosmic mind. And this kind of language that I just used, speaking in this way, may seem like an exaggeration or hyperbole. But the process of the sages, the priests and priestesses, is a metaphysical process, and there are certain things that cannot be known by a common intellect. And those things that cannot be known by common intellect, they cannot be it cannot be understood by simply reading or memorization, rote, or anything like that. So there are certain things that goes beyond the intellect. And Ab Amon is going to go further still, as he says, but in those names which we can scientifically analyze, we possess a knowledge of the whole divine essence, power, and order comprehended in the name. And farther still, we preserve in the soul collectively the mystic and arcane image of the gods and goddesses. And through this, we elevate the soul to the gods and goddesses. And when elevated, conjoin it as much as possible with them. But you ask, why of significant names we prefer such as are barbaric to our own? So we're going to stop here, because this question takes this discussion into another direction. So there are certain, when he says names which we can scientifically analyze, he is relating to an analysis through a metaphysical process, a process known to the mind. So it's not the science of, it's not a physical science. It's more of an astral science. So this is in line with the theurgical process and praxis of the priests and priestesses, the sages. And this entails an examination of the nature of the divinities, their powers, their forces, and their their iconography, their appearance, what they hold in their hands, or offerings they receive, or implements that they convey to the spiritual initiate in response to offerings. And when this analysis is undertaken, what comes out of it is the spiritual practitioner gains an insight into the essence of the divinity, the power of the divinity that is inherent in the name of the deity. So the name of the deity is a comprehensible label of an underlying mechanism or cosmic mechanism of the deity, which is related to its essence and its powers. And that is, so let's say, for example, the god Ptah. And the god Ptah isn't, the name Ptah is not simply the name of a deity. If that name is analyzed properly under certain conditions of mind, the nature and essence, the power, the order, the dynamic force of that deity can then be understood, can be known, can be discovered. And so in this, people ask, well, how were the pyramids built and how did they move heavy stones and so forth? If you know certain things about the certain deities, certain of the gods and goddesses, you can utilize those powers for spiritual means on a physical plane of existence. And because you're using astral forces on a physical plane, you're transferring the volatility of those forces on the physical plane. It makes things look mysterious. And there's much more to that about how the pyramids were built, etc. They were not built by normal human reason and intellect. And that's why they remain an enigma to people who try to study these things, because they're approaching it from physical sciences and a physical intellect, or an intellect that is focused on physical functions and processes. And so you have theories about ramps and coiled ramps and all this kind of stuff. But what went into it is something that is transcends material intellect. So in any way, the powers and forces of these deities, the name of the deity is sort of a code for the nature of the deity. And then the spiritual practitioner has to do certain things to discover what that is. So Ab Amon is he's going into a more esoteric direction right now in his writing. And further still, we preserve in the soul collectively the mystic and arcane image of the gods. So this is a very important point, a very important statement. We preserve in the soul collectively, meaning every human being. So if let's say you have 8-9 billion people on the earth today. Everyone collectively contains within them, I'm going to use that kind of language to make things easy to understand, contains within them the mystic image of the gods and goddesses. But here he uses the term arcane. And arcane means that very few people know that. Arcane means something that's mysterious, not known by many people. And so the problem of human folly with wars and genocides and murder, racism, is due to a profound ignorance of the true nature of what is being referred to as the human being. That every human being has within them the nature, the image of the gods and goddesses. But if you turn your mind philosophically or to philosophies that separates one or directs one to an outward extroverted process, then that inner nature, true nature, cannot be discovered. So that's what happens when you destroy temples and you kick out the priests and priestesses, et cetera, et cetera. You turn the mind of humanity outward, extroversion. And then you can have, world wars, World War I, World War II, bombing each other, shooting each other, mayhem, because the mind is turned away from one's inner divine nature. And then you have some people who innocently refer to, say, we're gods and goddesses. And then the people who, and those people may have limited understanding, but what about people who don't have any understanding? They look on those people who have spoken an intellectual truth and ridicule them because they know less than the people who know a little. They're turning away from the mystic truth. And then when you do that, what remains is separation from divine nature and a psychological process of duality. So us against them, me against you. And a system is built on conflict as opposed to on truth. Now, in ancient times, although this reality may be understood throughout the culture, the whole culture of ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, original name Kemet, you had only the priests and priestesses that would go into the temple to mystically realize what was culturally known. And by mystically realize, I mean going through the metaphysical process that leads to the mystic experience that corroborates the cultural understanding. And the people who stayed outside of the temple, they may have a cultural understanding, but they don't have the mystic experience to support the cultural understanding. That mystic experience is reserved for the clergy, the priests and priestesses that enter into the temple, that are led by hierophants and sages and saints. And through this, we elevate the soul to the gods. And what he means here is that you realize that essentially you are one of those deities. Instead of the soul searching into the world for contentment, for peace, for truth, it then turns inwards into its true nature. And then the soul realizes that it is one of those gods and goddesses. And again, this is not hyperbole. There's a mystic process that is going on within the personality that is going through the spiritual process, the mystic process, and is being led by those who are more elevated. And when the soul discovers that it is essentially one of those gods and goddesses, you realize what that means. It means it's a separation from your physical nature. So your physical nature is one thing on a lower plane, and your divine nature, the spiritual nature of the soul is on another plane. And therefore, in ancient times, you didn't have, realize that when you go to fill out a form and the form says select a race and you select a race, that's insanity. From a perspective of mystic insight, that's crazy. Because there's something about you that transcends race or the idea of race. That race is a concept. It's a damaging idea that has been produced for nefarious means. Essentially, your soul, and that soul is essentially equal to or the same as the gods and goddesses. Meaning, and when he says here, join it as much as possible with them, it means that depending upon the capacity of the spiritual practitioner, how expansive and elevated that personality can become. So these are, there's much more that can be said. These are serious issues of humanity, of human being, of what is purported to be a human being. So the problem is existing in a society that is predicated on dualism, and then reinforces that through its cultural expression. For example, sports is very big, so there's always competition. And in a capitalism society, the businesses are always competing against each other. So there's always, and then the genders are polarized. But if you have a cultural system that recognizes the mystical truth of the soul, you have more of a unifying, collective, whole society. So you have more peace, you have more a community, you have more communal life, you have more caring, sharing, and essentially you have much less violence, much less crime, etc., because of the nature of the society, the culture. If the culture is based on the nature of the soul within, how can you uh, do a genocide, or how can you indiscriminately just bomb people because of political ideologies or whatever? It will not be possible. Your conscience will not allow that, based upon the mind's realization of its own true nature. So in any way, we'll pick up here again next week. And this kind of teaching for serious practitioners, causes an internal reflection, meaning reflecting on one's own true divine nature. And if Ab Amun is sharing this, Porphyry is telling Porphyry that where you're coming from with this is from a dualistic perspective, where you're separating yourself from your own true divine nature. So you're making a correction. And the implication means that we all needs to make that correction in our own lives. We need to look to the mystic truth within, which is the nature of the soul, as one with those gods and goddesses. And therefore we live a life of peace, of contentment, of mystic truth, and spiritual realization. And with that will be it for today. Do again until we meet again. Prt.